With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder, and there appear to be 12 jury signatures affixed. Verdict form 2, involuntary manslaughter. We, the jury in the above captioned case, do hereby find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of involuntary manslaughter. Count 3, child endangerment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of child endangerment. Verdict form number 4, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, guilty of the offense of abuse of a corpse. Ladies and gentlemen, are those the verdicts of the jury?
Yes, sir.
You may be seated.
Hello and welcome to our special podcast, From Start to Finish, covering the Richardson trial. I'm WHIO Radio Program Director Jeremy Ratliff, and during this podcast, you will hear about what you could not see while following news coverage of the trial. Now here is your host, the editor of the Dayton Daily News, Jim Bebbington.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm here with Lauren Pack, reporter with the Journal News, and editor of the Journal News, Kyle Nagel. And the Journal News newsroom has been covering the Brooke Skylar Richardson trial and from day one. And Lauren, you spent the last 2 weeks in that trial room. Take us back to the beginning. When did you realize this case was going to be of such high interest?
Well, you know, I cover a lot of cases where, unfortunately, children are dead. And there are several cases that I'm covering right now in both Warren County and Butler County. But this case was a little bit different because the baby was exhumed from the backyard. And anytime you get something like that, especially when it's out there in the public where folks can see it in a nice neighborhood, in a small community, it's going to be a big story. And then when the indictment came out and there was such a plethora of charges and a big range of charges, I knew that there probably was going to be a big interest and a fight on our hands when the Richters joined in as the defense team.
Okay. And Kyle, from the whole newsroom's perspective, as this trial date approached, how did you and your team approach it? What did you do to get ready?
We knew that we needed to have the person with the most expertise, who is Lauren, there the entire time. We knew it was going to be of extremely high interest because of all of the judge, Donald Oda, held a meeting well beforehand and said, here's how we're going to handle the television camera setup. Here's how we're going to handle the still camera setup. So we had to coordinate with other newsrooms throughout the region to say, okay, our photographer, Nick Graham, will be there on Tuesday, Thursday to provide still photos. Other media photographers will be there other days of the week to do that. But the other thing that we had to do was make sure that we had folks ready to go to help cover things that came up during the trial, potentially, where, as an example, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but once a sentencing is done, the jury information is released, we have another reporter who heads off immediately to try to talk to jurors, which we did. And so we have a person who is in the courtroom, focused total attention on the details that are happening and the nitty-gritty and the core testimony and evidence, and then we had to be ready to support that to deliver other things to our audience in different ways. And so we used a lot of staffers in a lot of different ways to do that.
Okay. Lauren, describe, in the end, how long was this trial?
In the end, it was almost 2 full weeks. We started the day after Labor Day. So you had 4 days that week. And then you had 5 days, if you count the sentencing, and I do, the next week. So that's almost, 2 full weeks.
Going into day one, what was your expectation? What were you ready to see?
Well, I count the jury selection as day one. Some journalists don't. I do, because I know it's very important, and they had a lot at stake. They had to get a jury each side had to get a jury that they thought was going to give them a fair shake, so to speak. So when I went into jury selection, I also knew that the Richters, the defense attorneys, had twice filed for change of venue, saying that a jury could not be seated that would give Skylar a fair trial. So there was a lot at stake. The judge would not do change of venue until they tried to seat a jury. So we had to make sure that we believed that the people were telling us the truth, There was every hand went up in the room when the judge asked them how many people knew about the case. And every hand went up in the room, but they all said that they could set aside what they had heard on plethoras of media blogs and Twitter and everything else that was out there from, all over the world, really, and make a decision. So I'm always interested in jury selection, and it went very orderly. The judge, I've seen it go long, and the judge was very orderly about giving them so much time to talk and address the jurors. But one thing that was really interesting is it was almost like a small opening statements of sorts that the judge let them do. I've never seen that done before, and I've covered maybe 100 trials, and I've never seen that done before. And it was interesting because I had my friends who are attorney friends and prosecutor friends asking me, gee, we've never seen that done before either. But the judge thought that it needed to be done so that the jurors would have a little bit better idea of what the case was about, and if they could set aside their feelings, knowing a little bit more about the case, and still, follow the evidence that was in the courtroom.
So we've talked about Judge Oda a little bit. Was there anything else that you saw him do in handling this trial that was new to you?
Judge is what I like to call a free thinker, and he's not afraid to put on a gag order. He's not afraid to have his bailiff go and tell somebody to hit the road when he thought they were causing too much of a disturbance in the courtroom. And Judge also took a hold of the remains of the body of Skylar Richardson's baby. And that was not expected at the sentencing.
What's that mean?
He decided that the baby's remains would go to the Richardson family who had a burial plot. And the reason he decided that was because he viewed the baby, for better or for worse, as evidence. And he decides what's done with the evidence.
Okay.
Now, I had been talking with the prosecutor, Prosecutor Fornshell, as well as the coroner, Warren County coroner, at the time, and they believed that the remains, because there were two families involved, the family of the father of the baby, who were also in the courtroom, as well as the Richardson family, and they believed that those two families, were very much interested in taking the remains and burying them. So basically what would happen is a family court or a probate court would decide that. It's not unusual, not just in a homicide case, but also in some family cases, things like that happen. So the coroner wasn't that surprised about that, but I was really surprised when the judge decided that he made a ruling right then, right after he sentenced her, and he made a ruling. And we'll see if that holds. Okay. I have a feeling they may not.
On that point, if I may, so another thing about that is, and the judge addressed it during and after the sentencing, and Lauren wrote about it this week recently, is that he allowed, as an example, holes to be drilled in the side of the building to run cable to support the large media effort that was going on. So it could be broadcast gavel to gavel on court TV, for instance, so that there were tables set up outside with monitors so that more media members could be there. So he also went to lengths that are very uncommon for trials to happen to give, Lauren, I don't want to speak for you, but his point was he wanted to give the public access to everything that was going on so that no one could say that if it were conviction, innocent person was convicted, or if it was acquittal, murderer was acquitted. He wanted to provide everybody access to everything that was going on, highly unusual. And I think, Lauren, I think it happened all in a pretty orderly fashion, frankly, for the way that it was covered and delivered, and it got organized, and so it could be in front of everybody.
Ohio's got a proud tradition of court rulings. Sam Shepard case famously was called a Roman carnival because of how wild the public and press behavior was, up to and including photographing the jury before the trial. And we have a lot of rules in place now that stem from that case back in the 50s.
And there was an incident during which Lauren, you could talk more about this, but those who were in the courtroom, one person, the pool still photographer, was allowed to take photos. And I think even at one point there was somebody who was taking photos, and they had to have a finger wagged at them for doing that.
Right, and it's very hard because the judge did say, I mean, I'm in Judge Otis' courtroom quite a bit. I'm in all the courtrooms quite a bit, and in this day and age, it's very, very common for me to just pull out my camera and take pictures during trials, even not of the jury, but somebody on the stand, some of the evidence, even the judge, stuff like that. And I really had to remember that I was told not to do that in this case, that it was we had pool photography, and judge said, better not see your camera out. So
testimony's underway. You've covered this for a couple of years already. What was the first thing you were surprised by, Lauren?
The first thing that I was surprised by was the alleged, the confessions, so to speak. I call them admissions because I really was expecting something terribly damning to come out of Skylar's mouth in the confessions.
This is during the taped interviews with the police.
The taped interviews with police, because I knew that they didn't have a whole lot of evidence out there that didn't come from text messages or out of her own confessions or her own admissions, because there was no evidence that could come from the body. Now, because been in the ground a long time, they couldn't prove that it was alive. They couldn't prove the cause of death. The prosecutors all made out that that's because she put it in the ground and made sure we couldn't. But it's really tough to. I think it's tough for jurors to convict someone if you can't prove that that someone was murdered. So I was a little surprised. I mean, I did see a lot of the admissions that could be pretty damning, but they were kind of all over the place to me. So
now, when you're listening to that, do you watch the juries for their reactions or their body language? And was there anything that gave you a hint of what they were thinking?
I do watch the juries. I'm always kind of interested in how many of them take notes a lot, because if you're furiously taking notes like me or on Twitter, then you really can't watch the video itself. You can hear it very well, but I think a lot of times you have to look at the body language and how facial expressions happen and stuff like that. So I do watch the jury. I'm not real good at reading juries, and I know there are defense attorneys who are or think they are, prosecutors who think they are, and they hire whole people to help them out with that, with the right person and to sit on the jury and what they think. But they were very attentive. That's what I can say.
Okay. So as the prosecution, which went first, began laying out its case, what was the reaction in the courtroom? Was there anything that they introduced in evidence? The photo of their remains is the main one I'm thinking of, that brought sort of a reaction from the people in the courtroom.
Well, some of the people in the courtroom had to be told a couple times to hold their facial expressions and not to be whispering and doing, quote, a running commentary. Now, I never heard anything like that. I was on the other side of the courtroom. This courtroom is small, and there were reactions to evidence like that, and these were from the way that I viewed it. They were from family members of the father of the baby. It's tough to see things like that, to see remains of a child. And these were just little teeny tiny bones that you could hardly even see really was a person. I've seen a lot of things that are bad, but these were just little tiny bones. But then they sent them all out together, and kind of put them together in a body shape. And
they didn't bring them actually into the room, right?
No. These were photos, and they kind of laid them out as what the prosecution called Baby Richardson and the defense called Annabelle, which was interesting. But they laid them out and let folks look at what they had left, and there were lots of bones missing, and that did get a reaction. And they had to be told, because they were near the jury, they had to be told to keep a stone face, no talking.
Now, Kyle, as the sort of opening week was going on, the prosecution is letting its case. What could you tell from where your vantage point in terms of the reader interest? I know that your newsroom produces a lot of material on digital all day and then publishes it at the end of the day, and we print it the next day. What kind of feedback were you seeing? What kind of reader interest were you seeing?
One of the things that we can watch in two ways. One, we have tools that show what people are looking at currently on our digital products, and we have tools that show for the entire day how many times things were viewed, and the interest was incredibly high. In particular, we saw people doing internet searches and finding content of ours that was even not from this week of the trial, but past things that we had written because folks were at home, seeing it on TV, seeing it on Inside Edition, Googling her name, finding material of ours to pop up. And so the other thing that we did that worked out very well for us was we were able to also live stream the entire proceedings. So we had on our sites and on Facebook Live virtually every moment as well what was happening. So we saw people both wanting to read the engaging content that we had, the recaps of the day, we sometimes did separate stories about what was said during specific testimony that was very engaging, what was seen in interrogation videos, what as Lauren mentioned, something that was critical to the entire thing, and we knew was we were going to see these videos of 2 police interrogations, and what she said during those was going to be the jury had to decide what they believed or didn't believe from those, and that was critical. And so we were making sure that we were, one of the things that's difficult in something that's as high interest as this is you can get into the weeds on anything. There was a lot of medical testimony that was, any person, if they watched the entire thing, might say to themselves, oh, that's kind of interesting. But in the grand scheme of things was not maybe as important to some of the key points being made as some other things that were being said. And so part of our responsibility is to help people understand what is actually most important, what are both sides arguing. And so that's why we provided live stream of that. Lauren was tweeting furiously while sitting in the courtroom. And then we have multiple headlines and stories per day on our digital products that tried to help explain that. And also important, I thought, was every day we did a recap of the day, so to speak. So there were things we were updating throughout the day, but then at the end of the day, our audience could see, okay, here's a story that has the most important stuff that happened today. And but there was no question that in any given moment of those days and throughout those entire weeks, that it's something that dominated our audience's interest in our area for that period of time.
Now, Lauren, we're coming to the end of the prosecution's case. Do they wrap it up in a big way, or do they just have a final piece of evidence or a final witness and move over to the defense?
Well, they started towards the end. We had a lot of the scientific folks. We had the doctors, and we had the forensic pathologist that was trying to basically repair some of, or at least give an explanation for some of the reasons that the charring had been of the bones had been recanted by the original forensic anthropologist that took a look at them. But in the end, I mean, the defense, called their own set of doctors, and in the end, I think that it came down to which one you believed, and I just think that that the words that came out of Skylar's mouth and the text messages back and forth to her mother that seemed pretty damning were what the evidence was going to sway them with. And really they didn't do a big, what I would call a final witness. Everybody kept waiting for them to call Skylar's mom to the stand. They did not. And so they kind of wrapped it up, and that was it. And then the defense came on in. Now they had, they have closings that they like to kind of do the showboating on at the end. But that comes after the defense.
Now let's talk about the defense a little bit, because was Skylar an expectation? Did you expect to hear from her during the trial?
Well, there's always a debate among defense attorneys about putting their client on the stand. And a lot of times, if it's a self-defense case, then they're going to do it. If this person is claiming self-defense or something like that, then they're probably going to do it. And I talked to the defense attorney, one of the defense attorneys, and I asked them that. I said, how many witnesses do you have left? Are you going to put Skylar on the stand? And he said, we don't know yet. And then he gave me the thumbs down. So I think he kind of thought that they didn't need to. I mean, the jury heard a lot from Skylar.
From those taped interviews.
Yep. So all you got is you've got maybe a skilled prosecutor that might be able to get even more confusing testimony out of her. Or you've got someone who's weighing 89 pounds and looks pretty sick and kind of pitiful. So do you put them on the stand and chance the jury, being sympathetic?
On a day-to-day basis, what was her demeanor?
Her demeanor was just staring straight ahead. And I will say this, though. I was seated behind her. So, the media was all in the gallery, was all behind her. So it's kind of tough. She would turn around and talk to her attorneys and stuff like that, and you kind of see. But I did not see her. A lot of times you'll see defendants writing things to their defense attorneys, or talking to them a lot, or getting hacked off. But she was pretty much stared straight ahead. And about the only time I saw any type of emotion from her was when her brother Jackson testified as a character witness, and at the verdict.
Okay. So let's go to closing statements. So like you said, attorneys often, that is their last crack with the jury, and They do try to bring a little emotion into it to support their case. Which one, as a reporter, did you think presented their case better?
I think the prosecution did the best with what they had, and they did the best with trying to make the jury believe that she honestly was that she had planned to kill the baby when she found out she was pregnant, and that's why she was charged with aggravated murder, or at the very least did nothing to help her child when it was born alive. Now, that's what the prosecution says. I think they did their best with what they had to hammer it home. They showed the text messages again. They showed parts of the tape. They read the transcripts again, portions of it, and they did a pretty good job. But the defense was a little more quiet, and Charles Ritkers Jr. is a little more quiet than his father, and he did the closings. But I think they both did a good job. I don't know that it swayed anybody. I think it was already a done deal.
I was going to ask, the jury at that stage, are they still the same, or are they beginning to give any physical display of what they're thinking is?
I think they were squirming a little bit. I think they're about done. Sometimes, and in some of the expert testimony, you can see it too. There, you can see the jury losing a little bit of interest when you keep asking questions a lot, and the judge would make people move on, so to speak, because they'd ask the same question 4 or 5 times. But the judge also only gave them an hour for closings. He wanted it 45 minutes, but he gave them an hour.
An hour each?
Yep, that's it. And he timed it. Because at one point, I'm not sure, I believe it was Charlie Jr. asked, how much time do I have left, Judge? And he knew exactly how much time they had left.
That was the prosecutor.
Thank you.
After it was,
Yeah, okay.
and the judge said, you've got until 10:47. And so they were well aware. And that goes back to the same idea, and I don't mean to interrupt, but that goes back to the same idea of Judge Oda was very in control of every aspect of what was happening in the courtroom, with the media, with the public, with the timing, and that was very clear throughout several things that happened in this trial.
So before I ask you about the verdict itself, to that point, this was internationally being broadcast. Court TV's got a stage out outside the building. As the judge indicated, they had to drill holes in their walls to get them their cables. Was that level of visibility impact or affect what happened in the courtroom to did it ever get crazy? Did it ever get...
You mean among the attorneys themselves?
Just with the fact that there was an international audience, did that, sitting in the courtroom, did you ever get that feeling?
Well, I had to be there at 7:30 in the morning and run for a seat because it's a small courtroom. So I knew that there were lots of people that just really wanted to be in the courtroom itself. So I knew that there was a lot of interest, and I knew there were a lot of people that were following me on Twitter that were from out of the country. But I guess, I've sat in a lot of trials. So to me, if you follow what's going on in the courtroom, because I didn't get to see a lot of court TV because I was writing in the courtroom. So I'm going to have to go back and take a look at what court TV had to say, because a lot of people didn't like what court TV was saying and thought they were taking sides. I don't know whether they were or not because I didn't see it. So, yeah, I mean, you can get a sense that it's a big trial, and I've covered big trials before, but with a lot of media. But I think that's the first time that I've ever had that much international interest. Yeah.
So it's time for the verdict. It's a couple minutes to go. What's the feeling in the room?
Well, we had a question a couple hours before. They only were out for 4 hours. So, and we had a question a couple hours before, and it was about the last charge, which was the strangest to read if you read the law. It's a little confusing. The law is a little confusing on it.
This is the abuse of a corpse?
That it's a little confusing on that. They wanted more clarity. And I had an idea then that they'd already made up their mind on the first three, and it was likely going to go in the favor of the defense. So,
because it was that quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we were there a long time.
Yep.
And it's only been 2 hours, and they're asking about the last charge. So I just got the impression that they really had already, and probably had made up their mind before they even went back there.
I'll go ahead and jump in here to talk about what we heard. So we spoke to 2 jurors afterward. Ed Richter, a reporter on our staff, did, and the key thing to the entire case was everybody agreed she had a baby and she kept it secret and she buried it in her backyard. The main disagreement was it alive when it was born? And the experts on both sides said that we can't tell what the cause of death was because the baby's remains were too far gone. They were discovered more than 2 months after the baby was buried in the first place. And so those jurors told us we just didn't have enough evidence that showed the baby was alive when she was born. And that's why, as Lauren is exactly saying, it was pretty clear to us once a question came in on the 4th of 4 charges that they had made it their way past the 3 that would have been the 3 most serious, that would have had by far the more serious consequences. And it was just so helpful to hear that directly from those jurors later, where a lot of the evidence was circumstantial. A lot of the evidence was statements made, text messages sent, but not a lot that clearly indicated to them that there was any reason to believe the baby was born alive.
So, Lauren, what was the reaction in the room?
I think a lot of people were shocked. And then the family was sitting in the front row, and I was 2 rows behind them. And they were holding hands, and they were crying. And Skylar, she was relieved when they read not guilty on ag murder, but she knew that they had to go down the line because involuntary manslaughter is going to send you to prison too. And then when they came back with the other 2, she just really broke down and started sobbing. And honestly, I watched her more than I did the prosecution. But Charlie Jr. went over and shook their hand and, told them that, I guess that, well fought trial. And then immediately, the throngs of media went to the Ritkers, and we had to have a press conference afterwards, which was huge. I mean, out in the lobby, The judge had already made it clear that the hallway outside his courtroom was part of the courtroom, so you weren't going to be interviewing anybody out there. So we had to take it down the aisle, so to speak.
And then she was led away in cuffs for one night.
Yes, judge took her into custody, which I think was a little bit of a shock too, because I remember looking at her and her saying, "What are they?" It almost looked like that's what she was saying to Charlie Jr. And he explained it to her, and he revoked her bond. He gave her a fair bond. He gave her a $50,000 bond, which he took a lot of abuse for. And she had been convicted of a felony, and he went ahead and took her into custody. So she spent the night in the Warren County Jail.
Okay. And then next day, actual sentence for that charge. Going in, was there any feeling in the room? Did you get any sense that people were expecting the actual sentence to be more than it ended up being, or
I think people wanted her. I think the sense in the courtroom, I'm not, no. In the courtroom, I think everybody was pretty realistic that she was going to get probation. I mean, she hasn't been convicted of anything else. She doesn't have any prior record. She's been out on $50,000 bond for 2.5 years, as she's always showed up for her court appearances. It doesn't seem as if she's done anything to violate her pre-trial probation, so to speak. There really wasn't any reason to think that she wouldn't. And as Judge explained, she could get a year, but half of that by statute has to be community control. So in other words, the most he could have given her was 6 months in jail, which would have been in the county jail, not in prison. So he went ahead, and I just think he had to weigh all those factors, and the fact that she had caused no problems while waiting trial. And she had spent 7 days in jail. People tend to forget that too, because there was a time that she was arrested and then she was indicted, and that was way back 2.5 years ago. So she did spend some time in jail, and she spent overnight in the after the verdict was read. So I think everybody kind of expected her to get probation.
Okay. Any reactions surprise you when it was all done? I mean, any of the family members or any of the other folks who were around all week respond in a way that took you
all
for
of the
surprise?
family, her immediate family left. They were let out the back, and it kind of, and then the Ritkers talked, and then the prosecutor David Fornshell also held a press conference, which I thought was pretty stand up of him. I mean, he kind of lost a pretty big case. I mean, and he was there to tackle the tough questions. And, I think both of them did a good job. I think they both did a good job.
So when it was all said and done, highly visible act of the legal process of the United States was on display for everybody to see. The case resolved however it resolved. The jury made up its mind. How do you feel about your role and how you served the public in helping get this information out?
Again, I'm a courts and crime reporter. I do a lot of cases. Not all of them go to trial. A lot of them are plead out. But I try to pride myself on being very fair. And I tell defense attorneys that. I tell prosecutors that. Not the first time that I've talked to David Fornshell or Charlie Ritkers Jr. and Sr. during this whole process. And, I pulled documents, I pulled motions, and we went to 12th District Court of Appeals, and we argued all of this stuff for 2.5 years. And I was at every single one of them. So I always try to play it right down the middle. And I feel like I did. I mean, I don't tweet what I think is going to happen. I don't tweet, I try to keep it very fair. And I'll tell the defense attorneys and the prosecutors if they ask me what I think after the evidence is presented. But I feel good about the fact that we reported and we didn't take sides. And I think that's just really important. You can't get caught up. You have to kind of be a juror. You can't get caught up in the emotions. That's the way I see it.
And Kyle, at the end, the Journal News coverage was really blanketing for 2 weeks. Any feedback from readers? Have you heard from people about what you all did?
I think what we were hearing was that a lot of people don't really have don't get involved in the court system in that way. A lot of people are never actually on trial for anything, and therefore what they often appreciate is the difference between, and the Judge Oda references several times, there's this thing, but by law, we can only do this thing. And he was making things very clear about what was only allowed to be considered, what was part of the law, what could be introduced, what could not, what had to be moved to the side. And so many people would have an emotional reaction to what they see and what they believe who are watching at home. But what we tried to do most, and what we heard from people about, is we were really trying to explain exactly what was happening and why it was happening that way. Ahead of time, we were able to say the sentence is allowed to be this, and that's set in stone, where a judge can't just say, like, well, 10 years because I'm mad that we were on trial for 2 weeks. He had to follow specific things, and we knew what those things were, and so we were explaining that throughout. We did a good job of explaining, as an example, Skylar's mother, Kim, was not in the courtroom throughout the entire proceedings until the sentencing.
No, closing. She was there for closing.
Excuse me, yes. But that's because, very specifically, she was on a list to be a potential witness and therefore was not allowed in the courtroom. However, the father was, and he was somebody who testified. And so we explained that they were classified differently, and therefore one was allowed in and one was not. We did a good job of explaining midway after the prosecution ended its case, one of the charges was dismissed by the judge. It was his ruling that the prosecution had not done enough to
improve their case on the tampering.
On tampering with evidence. And so all throughout, there's a difference between saying things because they're sensational and we know they will jump in front of people, and explaining what is going on specifically. One of the things that the defense team hammered home in their news conference afterward was they felt like this case was sensationalized from the beginning, and that caused them great concern about being able to find a jury, being able to seat a jury that they felt would be fair. And a lot of that came from, Lauren referenced it, an early ruling by a forensic specialist that the bones of the baby were charred, and that forensic specialist later said, I was wrong, that's not the case. And so there were things that we could have done, said, produced that were more sensational than we did, but we stuck very close to, let's explain what's important and what's happening.
All right, well, Kyle Nagel, editor of the Journal News, Lauren Pack, a veteran court reporter. I really appreciate the work that you both did over that, and working with you. I was proud of what I saw, and I hope your readers, I suspect, did get a great deal of information, and hopefully they understood what this extremely important case